Installment of Echo Wirm Live. We do this every other Thursday, typically about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock Eastern Time if you're in the United States or wherever that translates to in your local time zone. We do this just to try to fit all the different demographic groups in. I know we have some viewers over across in Europe, and this is kind of their bedtime treat, whereas in the United States, most people are just finishing up their school day or their work day or getting out of school or work, and so we try to accompany them there. But if you're new here, how this typically works is it's an open Q&A. If you guys are in the live chat and want to ask some questions, you are always more than welcome to. I'll try to answer anything that I'm comfortable answering on camera. These can range from anything: questions about the channel, questions about our videos, why I say things certain ways, questions about me, although I do try to redirect things back to the content that we cover on the channel. If you have a question about the books that we cover, or what's coming up soon, you're always more than welcome to ask those in the chat. If we don't get to your question in the chat by the end of, we typically shoot for about 2 hours every week, feel free to drop it in the comments section below. All of our kind of pre-prepared questions that we do on a week-to-week basis come from the channel, come from the comments that you guys have on our different channels, and so we're happy to have you here. If you have questions, feel free to ask those. I see a few people in the chat right now. Flick Street Productions and Poseidon's Cabin BFF of Percy both say hi. Pogo Sam starts us off with a question. How is the speedrun process for Wrath of the Triple Goddess? And remind me, does it take place between Heroes of Olympus and Trials of Apollo? Which book was it that had a serious spoiler for Trials of Apollo? So a few different questions there. And I'll kind of bunch it together. We'll come back to a lot of these questions. But if you guys were unaware, so the new Percy Jackson book came out on Tuesday, right? Tuesday at midnight. I went to Barnes & Noble. My local Barnes & Noble opened at 10 a.m. I was in the door by 10:05. I was out of there by 10:06. Literally, they were stocking the shelves with the book, and I took it off the cart and walked up to the front counter. Went home, spent the entire day recording. So 10 o'clock, I bought the book. 10 p.m., I was done recording the entire audiobook. I will say this. I will never do that again. It was an experience. It was interesting. I don't know if you guys can hear it through the microphone, but my voice is completely shot. And it was a very long day. So I don't think I'm going to do it like that for the new Hunger Games book in March. But it was an experience. And my goal was to be the first audiobook of Wrath of the Triple Goddess available anywhere, which I think we accomplished. I almost wondered if I should put it up immediately on YouTube, but then I figured that was kind of unfair to my patrons. So it is up on Patreon right now. The new Percy Jackson book, which just came out 2 days ago, is available as a podcast, or excuse me, as an audiobook over on Patreon. And you can find it there for $3. It'll come out next Thursday, I believe, is when I have it scheduled to come out on the main channel. But yeah, it was a long process. It was a long day. But it was good. I enjoyed the read. It's fun reading things that I've never read before live on camera, and so I did that. Yeah, so that was the process. Your question about where it takes place. So the new Percy Jackson books, there's going to be a trilogy. They're calling it the Percy Jackson Senior Year Adventures. So books 6, 7, and 8 take place after Heroes of Olympus and before Trials of Apollo. So you don't have to read Trials of Apollo to read them, but you probably should read Heroes of Olympus because Percy references Hazel several times, he references Leo several times, and you'll probably be like, who the heck are these characters? But in terms of plot, the main three characters are just Percy, Grover, and Annabeth, just like it was with Chalice of the Gods. So you don't have to read Heroes of Olympus. I just think it would really help you with kind of where they are in their lives. He's going to reference things that you have no idea about if you haven't read Heroes of Olympus. But yeah. And you ask, which book was it that had a serious spoiler for Trials of Apollo? The third one, The Burning Maze, is the biggest spoiler in the entire Percy Jackson franchise. It takes place in that book. And sometimes it'll pop up in our live chat, and I'll have to block those users. Please do not spoil that book until it is out on the channel. Poseidon's Cabin BFF of Percy says, will you be reading Percy Jackson, Greek Gods and Greek Heroes, and The Singer of Apollo? Yes, eventually. Right now, I'm working my way through all of the other side books, so I just got done finishing Demigods and Magicians, which is the Percy Jackson Kane Chronicles crossover. That should be up on the channel as soon as Serpent's Shadow is out, so it'll be on Patreon 2 months before it hits the channel. It'll probably be up on the channel middle of December. And then next, I'm working on Camp Half-Blood Confidential, I think is the name of that one. And then I'll do Greek Gods, Greek Heroes, and then, yeah, all of the other side books there. So, Slytherin Prince says, hi, I missed one from Flick Street Productions who says, House of Hades graphic novel is either out now or coming soon. Very good. I did very much, I'm not a big graphic novel guy, unless that's the only medium that books come in. So, for example, I have all of the original Walking Dead comics. I have the Umbrella Academy, that sort of thing. But I did really enjoy the Mark of Athena graphic novel, so I'll have to check out the House of Hades one, if it's out or when it comes out. Let's go to some pre-prepared questions. This first one can probably bunch a lot of these together. Tumble Lily says, are you going to read the new Percy Jackson book? Kyle Campbell also says, are you going to do the new Percy? Yes, I have already done it. So, Wrath of the Triple Goddess is done, is complete, is available on Patreon. $3 or more if you want to give me more. Otherwise, it's literally just behind a $3 paywall for a single week. It'll be out on the channel for free next week. Daughter of Nick says, how do you already have Wrath of the Triple Goddess? It came out in my area Tuesday, so I literally just walked into Barnes & Noble and picked it up. Perguner Gia says, since I'm the first response, can I get a free copy? Not unless you become a member of the book club, which brings me to Patreon. So I want to give a quick shout out to all of my Patreon supporters, or patrons. Let me see. I always, for the life of me, can't find this little list of people, but these are my $5 a month or more patrons. $3 a month gets you everything on Patreon. I never put anything behind more than a $3 paywall. But then $5 or more, you get your name on this cute little screen here. Occasionally I'll read them out. I'm not going to do it today for the sake of time. And then these are the ones that I will list out. These are my $10 a month or more tiers. So League 2 tier, I got Brandon Doty, Hessa Al-Habashi, Rock and Ryan 99, Victoria Libretto, Rania, Katie Rose, Bella Joy, Goose, Annette John Taylor, and Srinija Srinivasan. League 1 tier, that's $15 a month or more, Sneovatics and Brooke Bursma. And then my champion tier, those are $25 a month or more, and those include John Buck, Charles Jacobson, Donald Easter, Dalton Bailey, Lydia Bryant, Zhukov Crawford, and Joseph Morrill. And the reason that I bring up champion tier is because for $25 a month or more on Patreon, I know that's to some of you quite a bit of money every month, and that's totally fine. But if you do become a member of the $25 a month or more tier, you get a free book every month. For no extra cost, not even shipping costs, I cover it all. I send you a free copy of whatever we're covering on the channel at the time. So, for example, if you were to become a 25 a month or more book club member, I would send you, at the beginning of October, a copy of The Serpent's Shadow for no extra cost than just the $25 a month or more that you're giving me. So if you want a free book, just join the book club. Let's go to a question from Saber7175, who says, should I wait to finish Chalice of the Gods before listening to Kane Chronicles? It really doesn't matter. So, the Kane Chronicles and Magnus Chase are both tangentially related to Percy Jackson, which means that they exist in the same universe, but their plots are so disconnected that it does not matter when you read them. All of the Greek stuff, so for example, Percy Jackson, Heroes of Olympus, Trials of Apollo, you're going to want to read in order, because that is a singular story. But in terms of fitting Magnus Chase and the Kane Chronicles in, it really doesn't matter, because those books kind of have their own continuity. Nothing that happens in Percy Jackson really affects anything that happens in the other books, and so you can read them whenever. So it's totally up to you when you want to read them. I will say I would finish one series before reading the other, just because it's the same author, it's similar settings, and sometimes you get characters and plot lines confused, or at least I do. So I would definitely finish all of the Percy Jackson books before moving on to the Kane Chronicles, or read the Kane Chronicles before you move on to something like Trials of Apollo, if that makes any sense. Let's go then to a question from Superfighter, who says, please tell me you have Trials of Apollo on your to-do list. Yes. So what we're doing right now is every day you should see a chapter coming up on the channel of the Red Pyramid, which is the first of the Kane Chronicles books. There are 3 of those. We're going to do Kane Chronicles, just 1, 2, 3. And then once we're done with Serpent's Shadow, we are going to do Trials of Apollo. So for all of my patrons, that means that by the middle of October, we're going to start Trials of Apollo. That will happen then 2 months later over on Patreon. So in my opinion, it's a pretty good deal. $3 a month and you skip ahead of the channel by 2 months. So yeah, we will start Trials of Apollo on Patreon in October and over on the main channel in December. Sarah W says, "What's the design on your shirt?" This is the Camp Jupiter shirt. So the SPQR. This is the shirt that all of the Camp Jupiter kids wear. I have a Camp Half-Blood one coming. I literally just ordered it for the first time in my life last week. I realized I didn't have one, and I should probably have one. So I'm going to, once I get the Camp Half-Blood one, I'm going to read all of my cameo requests over on so side tangent. I have a Cameo account if you guys ever want me to read something in Percy's voice. There's a link down in the description of this video if you guys want to check it out. But I figured if I'm reading things in Percy's voice, I should probably do it looking like Percy. So I went back to my natural hair color. It's a little closer to Percy's natural hair color. And I'm going to get an orange shirt to do it in all of those. Sarah W says, also, who shows up in Trials of Apollo? So in terms of former main characters that we've seen before, obviously Apollo is the main character. Percy, kind of, not really. Let's see. Jason and Piper are the two main ones. Leo does come back eventually. And then all of just kind of the Camp Half-Blood usuals. So like Nico's there, Will Solis is there, Dionysus, Chiron, just kind of the usual Camp Half-Blood crowd. But Percy and Annabeth have kind of moved on now. So they appear, but they don't really appear, if that makes any sense. Flick Street Production says, I have some fan casting for Heroes of Olympus. Mia Goth as Chione and Eva Green as Medea. What do you think? Mia Goth as Chione. Yeah, I could see that happening. So I've never seen a lot of Mia Goth stuff that didn't involve Shia LaBeouf, because they do a lot of stuff together. I've never seen any of her solo stuff, so I really don't have a read on her work outside of her being just Shia LaBeouf's girlfriend, if that makes any sense. So if I got more into her work, I would definitely be able to give you a better response to that. And Eva Green as Medea, I could see that. Yeah, I think that's a fair casting choice. Xpogo Sam says, loved chapter 15 of The Radiation Effect. The ambiance of Shanghai and the travel to it was well written. Very much looking forward to the mission chapter. I'm sure things will get messy. Yeah, so chapter 15 of The Radiation Effect just came out. I have some questions about The Radiation Effect that we'll talk about it later on in the stream. But this is the book that I am currently and actively writing on the channel. So I will write a chapter and then upload it on the channel. Chapter 15 literally just came out for everybody this afternoon. It is the last big chapter before everything falls apart. So chapter 16 is about the halfway point in the book, and chapter 16 is when one of the major characters dies. I've been looking forward to reaching this point for a very long time. And yeah, 15 is just kind of this big build-up for this climax, and then 16 is when it falls apart. 16 should be out on Tuesday for patrons, and then the following Thursday, 2 weeks from today, on the regular channel. So that's another thing that you get in advance over on Patreon. Let's go to a question from AJ Girl, who says, can you read Lord of the Rings by C.S. Lewis? I have dyslexia, so it would be really hard for me to read it myself. A couple of things. So yeah, Lord of the Rings isn't actually written by C.S. Lewis. Lord of the Rings is written by J.R.R. Tolkien. Very easy to confuse the two. They were literally best friends in life. C.S. Lewis is the author of the Chronicles of Narnia. So in terms of C.S. Lewis content, I have the first 6 books available on the channel, or we're currently working our way through the 6th of the Chronicles of Narnia books on the channel. The 7th one is currently being worked on over on Patreon. I have recorded all 7 books. They're just taking their time to come out to you guys. So all of those books should be available to you very shortly. In terms of Lord of the Rings content, yes, The Hobbit is on my list. You can see it right there. So I'm going to start with The Hobbit before I do Lord of the Rings, just because it's easier to get through. And then I will eventually do Lord of the Rings, hopefully. But for copyright purposes, we can't put it on YouTube, so it'll be available for free still, but it'll have to be exclusively over on Patreon and Vimeo. Links to both of those accounts. We have plenty of free content there. We have Hunger Games available for free, or at least we will. It's coming out next month. And all of our Harry Potter content is available for free down with the description, links to Patreon and Vimeo. So if there's ever something you can't find on our channels on YouTube, check those places, because there's some stuff that we can't have on YouTube for copyright purposes. Flick Street Production says, Mia Goth is married to Shia. I don't think I knew that. Plus, I based her fan casting on her work in the movie Pearl. I think that's the one I was thinking of. I haven't seen it, but I know which one you're talking about. That's when you think about Mia Goth. That's kind of the movie that I was thinking of. I've seen her in a lot of just she wasn't the starring role, if that makes any sense. So, for example, she was in A Cure for Wellness. She was in Nymphomaniac. A lot of Lars von Trier stuff, but. Sarah W says, "Can you tell or show us your list order of books/series up next?" Yeah. Here's my actively reading pile. It gets bigger by the day. So, I have The Serpent's Shadow, one of the A to Z Mysteries books, the next of the Among the Hidden series. Then I have a Magic Treehouse book. Then I have Catching Fire. Then I have Fire and Blood. Then I have another A to Z Mysteries book. Then I have The Tale of Despero. Then I'm finishing up a book by a local author. Below that, another Magic Treehouse book. Below that, Trials of Apollo, City of Ember. And below that, yet another Magic Treehouse book. So that's my active to-do pile. Behind me is my get to it when I can pile, which includes, if I can see behind my shoulders, Dune Messiah, The Book of Mormon, Divergent, more Magic Treehouse / A to Z Mysteries. I just sneak them in periodically. House of Cards, Sun and the Star, Maze Runner, the Avatar Chronicles books, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Becoming All Elite, The Hobbit, the next Artemis Fowl book, the next A Series of Unfortunate Events book, another Star Wars book, The Phantom Tollbooth, and then over here, Game of Thrones is up there too, Sherlock Holmes, Aragon, Fablehaven, more Star Wars, more Missing series. Yeah, there's a lot in my pile, but coming up next on the channel, so right now, airing daily is Chronicles of Narnia and Kane Chronicles. Once we're done with Chronicles of Narnia and Kane Chronicles, we're going to go to Trials of Apollo and Hunger Games. After those, then we're going to do Fablehaven. After Fablehaven, then we'll do Aragon. And then on the other side of things, we'll just keep working our way through Rick Riordan. Those are going to be our like daily chapter books, so the ones that have chapters released daily. And then everything else just kind of pops up on the channel whenever I can get it finished, if that makes any sense. Xpogo Sam says, Tuesday for chapter 16. Thank God I don't work that day. Jordan ain't gonna make it. I kind of want to do like a betting pool of who everybody thinks isn't going to last through chapter 16. Because I'm very curious. My wife thought it was going to be Emma. Which, I'm not going to say yes or no. I'm just going to say I'm surprised my wife thought it was going to be Emma, because Emma is the POV character for the opening chapter. Let's see here. Takbanan says, I wish you good luck on the Tolkien books, since he did make a correct way to pronounce the names. There are going to be a lot of times where I don't pronounce it correctly. I will say that. I'll do my best, but I noticed with Aragon, like, there is a pronunciation guide, and I'm probably going to butcher it anyways. Sarah W. says, what's your favorite standalone book, either popular or not well known? Good question. Standalone book as in it's not in a series. I would love to say The Giver, but they did make a series out of The Giver. I think The Giver works better as a standalone book rather than the first of four. We will do all of the other Giver books. That's another one in the pile behind me. But the first one is such a perfect standalone book that it kind of bums me out that there's a series about it. In terms of just on its own, I would probably say 1984 by George Orwell. Most of my favorite books are in series. So in terms of non-series books, I think 1984 probably is the easy answer. I like Of Mice and Men a lot. So if you think of just like classic literature from the 19th and 20th century, a lot of those would fit into that category. Another one that I don't think I've ever said on camera before, but that I really enjoy it's a French book. It's by Albert Camus. It's called L'Étranger, or The Stranger, which is a really I've never read it in French actually, but I really enjoy the English translation of it. Let's go here. Lost my place here. Sarah W. says, what's your favorite Chronicles of Narnia movie? I think it has to be Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. I really liked Prince Caspian. I went on opening night when Prince Caspian came out in 2008. I was really excited for that movie. I also really enjoy the original was it late 80s or early 90s? I want to say it was 1990 or 1991 that the original Voyage of the Dawn Treader film came out. I didn't think the new Walden Media one, it bombed at the box office, so that's why they stopped the series. But the new Voyage of the Dawn Treader film, I thought, steered a little too far away from the source material. And so I like the original BBC version from 1990. So I would say the 1990s Voyage of the Dawn Treader or Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe from 2005. Let's go to a question, or I'll just go through the chat here. Xpogo Sam says, Eva Green broke my heart in Casino Royale, so definitely a good pick for Medea. Yeah, I would agree with that one. I swear if it's Emma or Johnny, I'm going to riot. Yeah, that's kind of why it surprised me when my wife said that. I was like, oh, did I make it that predictable? If Emma is the character, I'm not going to spoil it right now, but my goal with the death was to not make it predictable. So I threw in 2 very solid red herrings. And I'm very, very proud of the chapter. I just finished recording it last night. And I'm like, this is... So if you've ever written something before, right, especially long form. So right now, it's looking like Radiation Effect is going to be about 500 pages manuscript. And so I've been spending 250 pages reaching a climactic point that I've been waiting to write for about 10 years. And my biggest fear was it's not going to have the pacing that I want. It's not going to have the build-up. It's not going to have the tension. And I got done with it last night, and I went, that is exactly what I've always wanted it to be. So I'm very proud of Chapter 16. I'm excited for you guys to hear it. Flick Street Productions says, I like Tamara Smart's casting as Talia in the Percy Jackson series, especially after she was wasted as Juliet in the Artemis Fowl movie. Yeah, Artemis Fowl has struggled to find its way onto the screen, hasn't it? I really enjoy the Artemis Fowl series. I have the first one available if you guys want to listen to it. T says, 1. Hi. After the Percy Jackson Disney series came out, I wanted to get to know the books, and that's how I stumbled upon your channel. Since then, I've listened to your reading almost every night. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. 2, that's kind of a crazy realization. I have to thank you for my good sleep all these months. It's so very much appreciated. Thank you very much, T. I really appreciate hearing comments like that. It makes what I do worth it, if that makes any sense. I don't make any money on YouTube, so hearing compliments like that and comments that you guys leave, that warms my heart and keeps me going through a book if I don't want to read it sometimes. I'm sure you guys have experiences like that where you just come across something that you don't want to get through. And for me, sometimes I'm reading a book and I'm like, why am I doing this? And then I get comments like that and it keeps me going. So thank you very much. Tucker Smallwood says, I'm such a huge fan of your channel. I've been listening to you all summer and am now listening to the Radiation Effect. Be so grateful if you would give me a shout out. Well, absolutely. Thank you very much, Tucker. Let's go to a pre-prepared question from Zarin Angel, who asks, I kind of answered this earlier, but I'll be happy to answer it again. Followed up by a question from Augustus Williams. So the questions are, is the new Percy Jackson before or after Trials of Apollo? And Wrath of the Triple Goddess is book 7, right? Yeah, so the new Percy Jackson takes place between Heroes of Olympus and Trials of Apollo. So you should read Heroes of Olympus before the new Percy Jackson, but you don't have to read Trials of Apollo. So if you are on YouTube, if you go to the playlist, the Camp Half-Blood playlist, I have every single one of those books in order, numbered. So if you go in the description of each of the books, it should say something along the lines of 1 out of 8 single series, if it's a Percy Jackson book. It'll tell you how many of the Percy Jackson books it sits in. But then it'll say something along the lines of book 1 out of 19 complete series. So that includes the order of like every single book involved, right? And that playlist is in order. So it goes the first 4 Percy Jackson books, and then I sneak in the Demigod Files, and then you do the 5th Percy Jackson book, and then you do the first 2 Heroes of Olympus books, and then it's the Demigod Diaries, and then it's the final 3 Heroes of Olympus books, and then eventually Demigods and Magicians will pop itself in there, and then you got the next 2 Percy Jackson books, and then it'll be Trials of Apollo, if that makes any sense. So everything on the channel should be in order of, at least me personally, how I think you should read them. Sarah W. says, what did you think about the whole Rachel Ziegler Snow White controversy? She basically insulted the story and characters even though she got the lead. Yeah, I'm not going to give my opinions too much on that. I don't think it's my place to speak for at least the people that... I get it, if that makes any sense. I'll be pretty vague with my answer because I don't want to get down a rabbit hole. There is a rabbit hole that we'll talk about from a pre-prepared question that someone asked. So me personally, I actually really enjoy Rachel Ziegler's work. I loved her in The Hunger Games. She's been solid in everything I've ever seen her in. She just talks more than she should, and has said some things about the original source material that is you probably shouldn't say if you're the lead in the film. So I think it was a little misguided to say the things that she did. And I personally, I haven't seen any of the Disney remakes. I don't intend to see any of the Disney remakes. I enjoy the originals too much, and so it's not a movie that I will see. And if it turns you off from seeing that movie, then shame on the production staff and the marketing staff. And but that's kind of all I'll say on that. I'm not the voice to give my opinion on that, I suppose. Let's see here. Atlantis Gaming says, who should the last God Quest be for Book 8? Me personally, being a big fan of Nike, I would say Nike above all else. But I get I don't know. It's a weird one. Because they haven't, as far as I know, they haven't released a title yet. Last year, when they released Chalice of the Gods, they immediately released the name and the cover of Wrath of the Triple Goddess. But they haven't done that yet for Book 8, so I'm very, very curious to see what will happen. I genuinely have no idea. Tucker Smallwood says, wish me luck on my football game. Absolutely. Enjoy. Flick Street Productions says, I once self-published my own book years ago. It's called Firstborn, and it's a humorous supernatural book with a big sense of humor. I'm going to do an audiobook reading on my channel. Well, I wish you the best of luck. I'm excited to hear it. Elias Quigg says, just about to clock into work. Just wanted to say have fun and have a good stream. Thank you very much, Elias. Let's go to a question from... Let me take a swig of my usual. JV221 says, can you please do Dune Messiah and Children of Dune? So Dune Messiah, wrong shoulder, is... Holy moly, I'm backwards. This book right here. Yes, it is currently in my pipeline. It should hit the channel probably February or early March. So yes, that one for sure I will do. I'm not sold on doing any of the other Dune books yet. I've already finished the first one. Obviously, it's up on the channel. I'm not sure if I want to continue past Dune Messiah. And for the sake of, it's a very hard narrative. It's hard to read as a narrator because of the way that it's written. Especially as we get further on in the series, like God Emperor of Dune, there's some weird stuff in the books that I don't know if I'd be comfortable reading. But we'll see. We'll see when we come to it. I have only promised the second book. I have not promised anything beyond that, so we'll see what happens. I have a rather tough question here from Aniika Thompson, who says, are you able to read The Philadelphia Negro by W.E.B. Du Bois? I'm not sure if you take requests like this, but I thought it was worth a try. Yeah, so I'm familiar with the book. I do want to, I have, this is one of the rare cases where I will say no to reading a book. And for more so personal reasons than anything, but I do want to kind of give you my reasons here. So the book in question is over 100 years old, and is written by an African-American author, just about the lives and the plights of black people living at the time in Philadelphia. I'm familiar with it. I understand you went into detail about having to read it for a class. And so far as I can tell by your profile picture, you are a person of color and are asking me to read this book. I will say no for a couple different reasons. The first one being, for the same reason that I will not read one of my favorite books on the channel, Of Mice and Men. And that is because there is probably wording or phrases used in the book, despite who the author is, that I personally will be uncomfortable reading as a white narrator. I don't think it is right for me to use certain phrases in my audiobooks. I'm sure there are things that, for example, in the second Percy Jackson book, the R word appears. I did read that, and I think in 20 years it probably won't look very good. This is a book you're asking that's about 100 years old, with a less derogatory version of the N-word in its title. And as me being a white narrator, I don't think it's my place to read that. I think me taking that away from a person of color reading that on their own audiobook channel is not something that I want to do. If there were a black narrator or a person of color with an audiobook channel who is interested in reading that book, I would be more than happy to promote it on my channel. But I personally don't think it's my place to read that book, if that makes any sense. And now, granted, I'm coming at this from a white person's perspective, and I want to be as respectful in my answer as possible. But that's the answer I'm going to give. So I do appreciate you asking me, but for that reason, I'm going to have to say no to that one. I hope that comes across as a respectful answer, if that makes any sense. Let's get a question from Ryan Erm, who says, do they find Percy by the end of The Lost Hero? Usually I don't spoil things, but that book has been out for a while, and the audiobook has been on the channel for a while. So the answer to that question is no. They do not, in fact, find Percy in The Lost Hero. They figure out where he is, but we don't see Percy until the beginning of the second book. So the Son of Neptune is when Percy reappears in the series. Sarah W. says, have you heard Maya Wynn's covers for The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes before the movie came out? They're really good and prefer some of them since the videos usually match the book. Off the top of my head, I don't think so. However, I know when I've already done the audiobook for Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and for the most part, I tried to sing the songs as they were sang in the film. And there are several songs in the book that don't appear in the film. And so for the tunes of those, I either made them up or I did some research on what other people had used on YouTube, and I almost wonder if that wasn't one of the ones that I listened to. So there is a chance that I have heard them, but consciously I don't associate that name with anything that I've consciously listened to. T says that's a very thoughtful well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Pogo Sam says, have you seen the trailer for The Last of Us 2 that dropped today? I did. I think it was the last YouTube video I watched before I went on this live stream. I came on my way home from work and I turned it on in the car because it popped up in my suggested feed. So yes, I'm very excited for it. As far as I can tell, they're moving into the second video game, and that was not very well received for a variety of reasons. Some good, some not so good. So we'll see what the fan reaction is to season 2. I'm very excited for it though. I'm a big fan of help me out in the comments. The lead actress's name that I'm blanking on for a second. Anyways, Flick Street Productions says, have you heard of the Artemis Fowl spin-off trilogy, The Fowl Twins? Yes, I have heard of them. I don't know if I'll ever read them on the channel, or it'll be a few years in the future if I do get to them, because there are like 6 or 7 of the original Artemis Fowl books, and then you get the Fowl Twin series, which are all compiled into what are called the Fowl Adventures, is the new name of the full series. So we'll see. Yeah, we'll see if I ever get to them. I haven't read them. Bella Ramsey, thank you. I almost said Ellie, and I was like, nope, that's the character's name. K-Star says hello. Hi, K-Star. Question from Mike Miller, who says, how do you read all of these books in so little time? Depends what your scale is. Because I feel like I don't read them in very little time. I read Wrath of the Triple Goddess in 10 hours, but it usually takes me about 2 months to finish a recording of this size. So if you think 2 months is a long time to finish one book, which for me personally it is, if I wasn't recording it, that would be a long time for me to read a book. But I know some people, it takes them several months to read a book. So it's all at your own pace. I don't know. But I try to do a chapter a day of all of these daily chapter books. Zach Sparks says, can you do the Kane Chronicles next? Yes, they are currently airing on the channel. So every day you should get a new chapter of the Kane Chronicles. The first 2 books are already up in their entirety over on Patreon, as is the first half of The Serpent's Shadow. So if you can see here, my lighting is, oh gosh, I didn't even turn my lamp on. That's why I'm so dark today. But I'm almost done recording The Serpent's Shadow. So if you want those books in advance of the channel, by about 2 months or so, you're more than welcome to join Patreon for $3 a month or more. Let's go to a question from Tyler, who says, did you have a Percy Jackson shirt available on the channel? Yes. I'm glad you brought that up. Someone brought up this shirt earlier, but I do have personalized merch if you guys want to check it out. My wife made this. This says, "I ate the kitchen table." It's my most famous blunder that I've ever done on camera. It's in the Percy Jackson font with a little trident underneath. And if you want to support the channel, it's like $19.99 American for a premium unisex t-shirt, and I think the most expensive is like a $30 pullover hoodie. But you can check that out with the bonfire link down in the description below if that's something you're interested in. Flick Street Productions says, Owen Colfer has talked about doing a new Foul Adventures novel that will focus on Artemis as an adult and is inspired by the X-Men Old Man Logan comic. Well, if it's inspired by the X-Men Old Man Logan comic, I'm curious what the language will be like in that. If you guys are unfamiliar with the Old Man, so the film Logan that came out, oh gosh, 7 years ago now, is based on the Old Man Logan comic book, and it's got a lot of language in it, which is why it was an R-rated film. So I'd be more than interested just based on that story, but I'm curious if it's based on Old Man Logan, what the storyline would be about. Jabril says, Trials of Apollo when? As does Arav Chandar, who says, will you be doing Trials of Apollo? Luca Hello also says, are you going to read the Trials of Apollo next? And a Bazinga Man says, will you do Trials of Apollo? Yes. So I already showed you my immediate read pile. It is sitting next to me at the moment, the Hidden Oracle. It will start on Patreon beginning of October, and it will start on the channel December 16th, I think, is the first chapter. Yeah, we'll be going straight through it as soon as we're done with the Kane Chronicles. So as soon as we're done with Serpent's Shadow, the next day it'll start appearing on the channel as a daily chapter book. So if you want to not have to wait till December for me to read that, feel free to jump over on Patreon. Lyra Green says, what does ozone smell like? That's a good question. If you've ever electrocuted yourself or like smelled something burning through an electrical furnace, that's kind of what it smells like. Or like the smell of a storm but not rain, if that makes any sense. So like you think of the smell of rain, right? Petrichor. It's like this unique, wet, like earthy smell. It's the other smell that accompanies it. It's the smell of a storm, if that makes any sense. I don't know how else to describe it. It's kind of sour and electric-y. Brody says, can you make audiobooks for Among the Brave and Among the Enemy? Yes, I've already done the first 4 in the series. I will finish the entire series eventually. Right now, Among the Brave is sitting in my pile right here. So that is next on my list. I'm hoping to have it out in the next couple weeks or so. I can't make any promises on that, but I usually try to do one of those out every couple months or so. So yes, I will get to them very shortly, hopefully. Question from Gareth Oliver, who says, did you like Wrath of the Triple Goddess? I think so. Obviously, I've only read it the one time so far. I'm not going to spoil anything. A lot of what I expected about the book happened. Like the plot elements that I thought were going to happen did happen in it. I will say I don't think I enjoyed it as an adventure as much as I enjoyed Chalice of the Gods. But I liked the atmosphere because it takes place around Halloween. So like the whole theme of the book is Halloween. And so like the atmosphere was fun, but I don't think I enjoyed the story as much as Chalice, if that makes any sense. Let's go to a question from Edna Slyer, who says, why do you pronounce Hazel's name that way? Good question. The easy answer is because I'm a wrestling fan. So the guy who is in charge of WWE, his last name is also spelt the same way, and he pronounces it Levesque without the S. I know some people like who aren't familiar with French often say Levesque, which, yes, that's how it's spelled, but typically in America, you're going to pronounce it Levesque. If you are from France, then you typically do pronounce the S. So I know Rick Riordan has said before that he pronounces it Levesque, and I, for the life of me, couldn't get over the fact that I have always said Levesque, and so I pronounce it Levesque. But what I have found doing research on it, because you're not the first person to ask me that, in the Americas, so like in Quebec and in Louisiana, which is where Hazel's family's from, you typically don't pronounce the S, but in France, you typically do pronounce the S, if that makes any sense. So it's, I mean, author's choice. So author's right, I'm wrong, that sort of thing. But that's why I pronounce it that way, is because I'm a big wrestling fan. Flick Street Productions says, Owen Colfer has also talked about doing a sequel to The Supernaturalists, but hasn't done it because his publisher didn't demand it. I'll be covering The Supernaturalist on my channel as well. I'll check that out. I've never read The Supernaturalist. KStar says, are you up to date with the MCU, and have you been watching Agatha all along? No. I have not watched the MCU since WandaVision. I'll be honest with you. I lost interest after Endgame. I think most people did. I'm one of those people. I'm sorry. I was never a big superhero fan. So that's my defense of that. I never grew up being a huge comic book fan. I didn't really get into superhero films until probably Captain America came out, and then the Avengers just became a thing. And so I was always just kind of a mainstream Marvel fan for that purpose. I was never like super into it the way a lot of people are. Josiah Slayan says, how do you come up with so many character voices? Good question. So I do it less so when my base narration is American accents. It's harder for me to switch from my natural voice into something else than using a different voice already and then switching into something else. So, for example, when I read Harry Potter and I have kind of my baseline British accent, it's easy for me to then switch to other versions of British accents. So, for example, if I'm reading with an RP accent, I can easily switch to a West Country accent for Hagrid. I can easily switch to an Irish accent for Luna. I don't do a very good Scottish accent for McGonagall, but it is what it is. Whereas if I am doing kind of my own normal voice for Percy, and then I try to throw in an accent, then it gets a little sketchy. But you asked, how do I come up with the different voices? It, a lot of the times, is based on the film adaptations. So again, with my Harry Potter readings, a lot of the time I was just doing impressions of the actors. Same with Percy Jackson. A lot of it is based on the original films. And so, like, my Hades has a British accent because I am basing it on Steve Coogan. So that's where that comes from, if that makes any sense. Atlantis Gaming says, I've been into DC Comics my whole life and have not watched Marvel since 2008. That's a weird time to not have watched Marvel since. I feel like people didn't watch Marvel until 2008. But yeah, I've always, if I had to pick a comic, I've always been more of a DC guy. I've always been more into the Batman type stuff than any of the MCU stuff. Let's go to a question from Marcus Nielstadt, who says, greetings from Germany. Well, dankeschön. Is that a figure of Neuschwanstein Castle behind you? Yes, it is. I'm using it as a book weight at the moment. But yeah, I have a lot of... I have been to Neuschwanstein several times. Not several times. I've been there twice. But yeah, I keep little knickknacks. I don't know, like, of all the places I've been to in the world, I would say Neuschwanstein is probably one of my favorite places I've ever been to. That whole area, the Swan Lake, Hohenschwangau, that area, I think, is just, like, one of the most beautiful places in the entire world. So I kind of commemorate it with things around me. I have a snow globe. I have that. I have a mug somewhere. I like swans, if that wasn't obvious. You see the Wickham Wanderers scarf behind me. Flick Street Productions says, I consider your Percy Jackson audiobook readings better than the official ones by Jesse Bernstein. Yeah, I want to say this humbly because I don't think mine are the best that they could ever possibly be. But Jesse's readings are not very good. So thank you for the compliment. But I will say it's not a very high bar, in my opinion, when you're going after the official audiobook. My Harry Potter ones come nowhere close to the official ones by, like, Jim Dale and Stephen Fry. Those are phenomenal. But Thank you very much. Let's go to a question from Apu Akea, who says, do you have a physical copy of your book, The Radiation Effect, available for purchase, or is that not an option yet? It's not an option yet because the book's not finished. I just finished about the halfway point, so I'm at about 240 manuscript pages at the moment. The whole book is probably going to be between 450 and 500 pages prior to like major cuts and major edits and that sort of thing. I am in contact with an editor. I'm going to send it off to an editor fairly shortly, just to kind of get initial feedback. My goal is to have it either self-published by the end of next calendar year or be in contact with a publishing house to get it published the beginning of 2026. So I will let you guys know when I have a physical copy of it. But all of it that I have finished is available to you right now, or will soon be available to you through Patreon and on the channel, if that makes any sense. Let's go to a question from Reese Without Her Spoon. I like the name. Who says, will you please tell us which character is going to die in chapter 16 of The Radiation Effect? I will not. It is probably the biggest spoiler in the entire first book. Definitely not the series, but in terms of the first book, it's like things happen in the rest of the book, and I don't want to sell the second half of the book short because major things happen. But in terms of like the big shock moment where just kind of the innocence dies, if that makes any sense, it's there. Like chapter 16 is the point of no return for all of the characters, specifically one character, because they never come back. And so yeah, I'm not going to spoil anything. But like I said, that chapter will be available on Patreon next Tuesday, and the following Thursday, not the immediate Thursday, but 2 weeks from today, will be out on the channel. So if you guys want to make your bets over on Discord about who is going to die in chapter 16 of The Radiation Effect, I would love to get your thoughts. There's a specific channel for Radiation Effect, just to chat and give opinions and stuff like that. But I would love to get your guys' thoughts on that too. Xpogo Sam says you should listen to the Jesse Bernstein ones, or at least the first 5, just for reference. There's a lot of tonal stuff that just feels really off. Yeah, I've tried to listen to the first one. I'm not. Sorry, I just got distracted by your second comment. That's a good one. I can't say yes or no, but maybe. Let me talk about it in a quick sec. But yeah, I'm not a fan of the official Percy Jackson audiobooks at all. I think there are, for example, my audiobook readings are definitely more voice acting than audio narrating, and I did that on purpose. I did that for entertainment value. But at some point, if you're reading an audiobook, you have to at least be enjoyable to listen to. And I just am not. I have never enjoyed the official ones. Xpogo Sam then says, this was the one that distracted me, says, ultimate red herring, Xander is going to die. Yeah, that would, I can't say yes or no. I'm happy that my writing has done what I wanted it to and got you guys thinking about it. Like, that's the goal. My goal is to not treat the audience like idiots. I'm not trying to walk you guys through this story. I'm trying to raise a lot of questions that I want you guys to speculate about. So I'm happy that it's working. Flick Street Productions says, have you seen any films by Wes Anderson? He's one of my favorite filmmakers. I love The French Dispatch, Isle of Dogs, Fantastic Mr. Fox, and Asteroid City. Yeah, I will say this. I'm very so someone last live stream asked me about Quentin Tarantino, and my answer is kind of the same. I'm not a fan of like their styles over any other. Like, there are certain directors that I really, really enjoy. Just specifically enjoy their styles. I wouldn't say Tarantino or Wes Anderson are people that I love their movies because of the style. But there are Wes Anderson movies that I really do enjoy. I love The Grand Budapest Hotel. I like Isle of Dogs. I'm not a big stop motion guy, but for whatever reason, Isle of Dogs I enjoyed a lot. The Life Aquatic I enjoy, but yeah. So it hit or miss. I'm not like a go out and die for Wes Anderson because I love every single one of his movies, but like I enjoy some of them. Xpogo Sam says, I still think from the Jesse Bernstein books, the worst blunder is his voice for Demeter. Yeah. We can stop ratting on other audiobook readers, but yes, you're right. Oh, I love all your questions about the radiation effect. That makes me really happy. You guys can keep asking stuff. I'm just not going to tell you who's going to die in the next chapter. Ashton Pierce says, what has been your favorite book to record so far? Good question. It's a long book. I am really enjoying reading Game of Thrones as an audiobook. It's very fun to do adult literature with different POVs, if that makes any sense. A lot of time when I'm doing like adult literature, for example, House of Cards. Like House of Cards is one of my favorite books. But it's hard to do a third-person omniscient narration with so many different characters throughout an entire narrative. Whereas, like, with Game of Thrones, each 8 pages I get to switch to a new POV character, and I really enjoy that from just a mature source material, and so that's been fun for me. I really enjoyed reading Half-Blood Prince. I really enjoyed reading Goblet of Fire, actually. Goblet of Fire was probably my favorite audiobook experience that I've ever had. I really enjoyed it for some reason. I couldn't give you a reason. Let's see. I enjoyed reading The Giver a lot. I'm trying to think what else is behind me that... Yeah, I'll give those answers for now. Atlantis Gaming says, did you hear about the Maze Runner reboot? I haven't heard about that yet. I'll have to look into that and see... unless someone brought it up a couple weeks ago, because that actually does kind of sound familiar, but I may have put it out of my head. Let's go to a question from Edith Taylor, who says, when did you start reading audiobooks? So I started reading audiobooks a little less than 2 years ago. It was, I think, December of 2022. And I started the channel on, like, the beginning of... Excuse me. I started putting things up on the channel for the public January or February of 2023. And then the channel really just kind of exploded when the Percy Jackson TV show came out. And so that's when, like, I actually got serious about doing it consistently. And I started a Patreon account last December. And so, yeah, it's been kind of a fun journey in the last couple of years. So I would say 20 months ago, for lack of a better timeline. Flick Street Productions says, did you know that Christian Coulson, who played Tom Riddle in Chamber of Secrets, was one of the audiobook narrators for Cassandra Clare's new novel, Swordcatcher? I didn't know that specifically. I did know he was doing audiobooks, but that's cool. One of my favorite facts about, so they recast Tom Riddle for the 6th film, right? And so the 2 actors that play him in that film, the younger one, the orphanage version, is Hero Fiennes Tiffin, who is the nephew of Ralph Fiennes, who plays Voldemort, and Joseph Fiennes, who is Ralph Fiennes' brother, who is also another very prolific actor. And Hero Fiennes Tiffin was also recently in... no, this was about COVID time. But he's done some kind of lead roles in other films as well. But then the older version, the high school version, or the Hogwarts version of Voldemort in that film is played by Frank DeLange, or DeLange, however you want to pronounce his last name, who was in Fear the Walking Dead with an American accent, which is, anyways, different things that I enjoy coming together through casting, which is fun. Pogo Sam says, I do kind of like in the Radiation Effect how we don't get other characters' context for each chapter necessarily. Unlike Harry Potter, for example, everything happens to all the main characters, if that makes sense. Yeah, I did that on purpose, because I want... So, for example, one thing I want you guys to come across in the Radiation Effect is almost every character is an unreliable narrator. So, for example, Chapter 8 is a Kent chapter. Chapter 9 is a Margot chapter. At the end of Chapter 8, Kent talks about how Emma is constantly staring at him through the dance, trying to make him uncomfortable about her dancing with Johnny. Whereas then in the next chapter, Margot talks about how the entire night Emma couldn't keep her eyes off of Johnny. And so it's like, okay, who's telling the truth here? Like, which one should I believe? That sort of thing. I just want you guys to keep second-guessing the motivations of each of the characters, because each one of them has a specific, not agenda, but perspective on the world that they are... I hopefully am putting through their chapters as POV characters, if that makes any sense. So thank you for noticing that. I really appreciate that. Srivatsa Tatapatri says, your Percy Jackson books are phenomenal. You made Percy Jackson special for me with all your voices and imitations. You're a hero. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Atlantis Gaming says, what is your top 5 movies next year you want to see? That's a really good question because I honestly don't know what's coming out next year. I have no idea the release schedule for anything anymore. COVID kind of destroyed the movie industry, and I stopped seeing movies in theaters. And so I genuinely, I have no idea what's coming out ever. Give me some ideas and I'll let you know how excited I am to see them. Flick Street Productions says, are the chapter titles in Trials of Apollo supposed to be humorous haikus? Yes. The interesting thing to note, so the only reason I know that this is through Avatar The Last Airbender, haikus are almost always very specifically supposed to be about nature. So whether or not it's 575, it's not necessarily a correct haiku unless it's a poem about nature. And Americans or Western audiences don't typically get that or don't quite understand that. And so, yes, they are haikus in the American sense because they're 575, but they wouldn't qualify as actual haikus in Japan, if that makes any sense. But yes, each chapter title in... when I put them up on the channel, I'm still just going to put chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, but each one has a title basically summing up what happens in the chapter through a haiku. Xpogo Sam says, yeah, it frustrated me until I realized it's intentional. Well, good. I'm doing my job right. That makes me so happy. Here to Learn says, can you do the Aragon series too? Yes, Aragon is sitting over my... which side? This side. That right there is Aragon. I will do the first 4 books. I'm not really sure if I have the time to do Murtagh yet. But Aragon should start on the channel in February. I want to say it'll start as a daily chapter book. Paulina says, can you do the Magnus Chase audiobook? Yes, it'll be after Trials of Apollo, so it probably won't start happening on the channel until the middle of next year. We're going to get through Kane Chronicles, we're going to get through Trials of Apollo, and then Magnus Chase will be the last Rick Riordan series that I read. So we'll get to it eventually, but it's going to take a while. Let's see here. Atlantis Gaming says, 2 movies I want to see are Superman and the Michael Jackson movie. That's right, I forgot they're making a new Superman movie. I'm curious. I'm cautiously optimistic would probably be the best phrase. The one that I've been waiting for forever, and I actually don't even know if it has a release date yet, because it was like supposed to come out this summer, I think, and then they've been doing like 18 months of reshoots. And the reason I say I'm looking forward to it is because, like I mentioned earlier, I'm a big wrestling fan. Seth Rollins is making his kind of major film debut. I can't remember who he's playing or if he has a named character yet, but the new Captain America movie, Brave New World, is supposed to come out sometime next year. So I suppose of all the films that I would want to see that I know about coming out next year, it would probably be Captain America 4. Xpogo Sam says, I love all the prophecy and poem lore in Trials of Apollo. His absolute horror at the Limerick prophecy is always funny to me. I will say that I love Percy Jackson as a POV character. I think he's a fantastic narrator. He's a lot of fun. Apollo is even more fun than Percy is. Apollo is so much fun to read for as a POV character. And I might get sick of it after 5 books, but so far in my experience reading through the first book, I'm having a blast with it. And so I'm really looking forward to see where the series goes with him as the narrator, because he's so funny. Feel free to keep asking questions in the chat. I'm going to go to a question from Walter Carrington, who says, where has been your favorite place in the world to travel? Good question. I am fairly well traveled. I talked about it before. I'm very lucky to have grown up the way that I did. I'm very, very blessed and privileged, and I grew up very lucky. So I've been a lot of places. I've been basically to every major city in the United States, and about 20 countries. I lived in Italy for a bit. My wife and I went to England this summer. I've been to Germany. I've been to the southeastern parts of Europe. I would say my favorite place personally that I've ever been, if I had to choose one place, would probably be Dubrovnik, which is a city in the south of Croatia. It's a walled medieval city that has a fascinating history. Especially recently, it was bombed in the 90s during the Balkan Wars, and that's also where they filmed King's Landing for Game of Thrones. So as a Game of Thrones fan, going there, it was a really, really cool experience. My wife and I really enjoyed the northern Midlands of England, so we went up through Staffordshire and Derbyshire, and that was really, really cool. I may have recency bias, and I also may have bias for the fact that it was the first international trip I took with my wife. But Dubrovnik and the North Midlands were really cool. And then the last place I'll mention is San Marino, which is a tiny little country in the middle of Italy, kind of like the Vatican. It's up north, more on the way to like Venice. But San Marino is really, really cool, especially if you go there on a foggy day, because it literally sits on one mountain, and you can't see the ground if it's foggy. And so you're just sitting. It feels like you're up in the clouds on Mount Olympus. It's if you look up, I think it's called Monte Titano or Mount Titan. It's the main mountain of San Marino. And like I said, if you go there on a foggy day, you can't see the ground. And so it's just this bizarre, bizarre feeling. So those are my 3 favorite places I've ever traveled to. Xpogo Sam says, Apollo's character is very fun. Just being obliviously egotistical the entire time is such a good bit. Yeah, no, even like from the off, the first chapter is so much fun. Flick Street Productions says, what do you think about the ending of the movie Dune Part 2, particularly the changes from the book ending? Yeah, it's interesting. So I thought Dune Part 2 was one of the greatest films I've ever seen. Like, straight up. I thought it was one of the best theater experiences I've ever had. It does change a significant amount about the book. Obviously, he doesn't have a kid in the film, which is a major plot point in the book. His sister is alive in the book and not yet born in the film. Otherwise, like the major plot beats apart from that are pretty much the same. I really liked just kind of the final confrontation. I liked the atmosphere that the film ended with. And I thought all of the changes were tasteful, if that makes any sense. Beyond that, like, yeah, I thought it was one of the greatest films I've ever seen. And I say that as a fan of Dune. So I'm not complaining about the changes that they made. I thought it was really, really solid. Dune is a hard book to adapt. That's why they've tried it 3 times. But yeah, I loved the film. Atlantis Gaming says, a Minecraft movie could have been good. It didn't need to be live action. Yeah, that's not a film I will probably end up watching. I know a lot of you are, and so I'm cautious when I say this. I'm not a big Jack Black fan. So I'm not intending to see the Minecraft movie when it comes out. I'm sorry. Let's go to a question from Jay Easy, who says, is the podcast available on Spotify? Good question. I'm glad you brought up the podcast. So I talked at the beginning of the stream. We do these every other Thursday. And interwoven with that, on the other Thursdays, we record a podcast where we talk about just kind of, instead of recording audiobooks, we basically talk about the books that we're covering on the channel. So right now, our first 3 episodes are out, talking about the first of the Harry Potter books, Philosopher's Stone or Sorcerer's Stone. And you can find that basically anywhere you get your podcast from. It's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Spotify, I think it's on Amazon Music. Is that still a thing? iHeartRadio, YouTube for sure. You can find it on YouTube if you go through our playlists. Otherwise, you can look up just Echo Wirm, Worm spelled with an I, and look up like the Echo Wirm Echo Chamber podcast. You should be able to find it over on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So those are every other Thursday that we don't do the weekly Q&A live streams, or the bi-weekly, whatever. A few more questions here. Tavion Willis says, can you read the Fantastic Beasts series? I can't, because it's not a series. I can read you Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, which will be an interesting audiobook because it's not a book. It's kind of like a visual guide, and I'm going to try my best to like read it as an audiobook, but we'll see what happens. Fantastic Beasts, the films, are not based on any book. There's no book that it's based on. It's its own screenplay. It took the title from this book, but it has very little to do with the actual book. So in terms of can I read them, no, because it doesn't exist as a book series. Flick Street Production says, I consider Baron Harkonnen to be like a snake. They appear docile and restrained until they strike you. Yeah, the Baron is one of my favorite characters ever. He's a creepy dude, especially like the film's kind of not dumbed down, but like he does a lot of stuff in the books that is very, very horrific, and they didn't really show that in the films, which is fine because you'd probably have to make it significantly more than R-rated if you went with how he's described in the book. It was very controversial when it came out. Probably still would be controversial today, but yeah, he's a horrific person. Xpogo Sam says, personal update. I said I'd hate binge The Cursed Child when it was done being recorded. I made it not even 30 minutes. Yeah, it's not good. The Cursed Child is one of the worst things I've ever read as a Harry Potter fan. It reads like a bad fan fiction. I have read better fan fiction of Harry Potter than The Cursed Child. I've read a lot worse too, don't worry. But yeah, Cursed Child is not very good. But I do have that available if you guys are interested. It's over on Patreon and Vimeo for free. Links are in the description below. Feel free to keep asking questions in the chat. I'll stay as long as you guys want to. I have a few more pre-prepared here. Olivia Fangirl says, are you going to do Goosebumps for Halloween? Yeah, someone asked this a couple weeks ago. Asked if I could do like a bunch of them every day. That answer is no, but in terms of will I give you guys a Goosebumps book before Halloween? Yes. I'm currently, where did I put it? I did put it somewhere, and I can't remember where I put it, but I am going to read, I think it's called The Ghost Next Door. It's like book 10 in the series. It's one of my favorite Goosebumps books, but I will be reading that and hopefully have it out to you before Halloween. So yes, one Goosebumps book will be available. I'll try to get more out before next year's Halloween, if that makes any sense. Let's go to a question from Peter Islington, who says, when is the next Diary of a Wimpy Kid book on its way? Good question. It's behind me, over my shoulder, the fourth one. Probably, so I try to, with all of these, like I said, Among the Hidden book, the Missing series, that sort of thing, the Star Wars books, I try to do one every couple of months. So whenever The Last Straw came out, give it about 2 months, and that's kind of the rough time frame that I'm looking to release Dog Days. So I talked before that, like, I'll keep doing all of these series books, because these books just continue to come out. So I'll keep doing them until, like, people stop watching them on the channel. The weird thing about my Diary of a Wimpy Kid readings is, I don't know if it's the algorithm picking it up weird or what happens, but my first Diary of a Wimpy Kid book has less views than Roderick Rules, which itself has less views than The Last Straw. So, like, the more I do them, the more views that the later ones get, and I'm not really sure what's going on there. So, kind of curious to see what's happening. Flick Street Production says, why does Frank Herbert have Paul and his father be in love with women who aren't their wives? Good question, actually. Lady Jessica is Leto's concubine, just like how Chani became Paul's concubine in Dune Messiah. So, it's kind of a loaded answer. There is an answer. So, the reason being that, just like Game of Thrones, the world of Dune is a feudal system. So what that means is that it's basically based on medieval, just the world of medieval times, right? And so there's a bunch of lords that occupy a whole bunch of land, and everything is done for political reasons rather than personal reasons. So nowadays, obviously, we don't live in a feudal society. Most of us live in democratic republics or constitutional monarchies, which means that typically, especially for us common people, there aren't restrictions on our marriages, or there, like, I didn't marry my wife for political reasons. Like, my wife doesn't have any money that I'm trying to get out of her family, that sort of thing. But in these worlds, so in Game of Thrones and in Dune, marriages are a political tool. So if you know your history of the world, like the actual earthly world, back in medieval times and even up to about the mid-1800s, most marriages done were for political reasons. And so in order to kind of make your family seem richer, or to better yourselves, or give yourselves more money or more status, you would marry off your daughters to wealthy houses. and oftentimes you would try to make them appear as attractive or wantable as possible so that it would benefit your house. So for Paul, from Paul's perspective, his whole goal is to justify his becoming emperor, right? So Leto doesn't get married. His father, Leto, doesn't get married to Jessica because Jessica isn't like wealthy. Jessica is a common-born, as far as we know, Jessica is a common-born Bene Gesserit witch and offers no like political strategy or allegiance except for the fact that she's a Bene Gesserit. But he does love her, and so he wants to be with her, but a marriage would make him look weak, if that makes any sense. So he never marries her, but she's his concubine. She is the mother to the heir of his throne, but she's not his wife because it is not politically advantageous. Same thing with Paul. So Paul, at the end of the book, marries Princess Irulan, who is the daughter of the emperor. And the reason that he doesn't marry Chani is because Chani is a common-born Fremen, who, despite her status in the Fremen, would not offer Paul power in terms of the grander scale outside of Arrakis. And so he keeps that marriage position open for someone who would allow him to up his status, that person being the emperor's daughter, Princess Irulan. And so when Paul becomes emperor, he marries Irulan to justify him being emperor, because their kid then, if they were to ever have a kid, or even through their marriage and her being the stepmother to Chani's kids, would then justify them being the heir to her father's deceased throne, if that makes any sense. So, for example, let's give a good example of in England during the anarchy, right? So this is way back in the 1200s, earlier than that, late 1100s. So the king of England at the time was Henry I, and he had an heir to the throne, and his name was William, I think. Off the top of my head, I can't remember. But he died in a boating accident. He was killed in the White Ship disaster. And so Henry I didn't have an heir to the throne. And he only had daughters left, and so he made all of his lords underneath him swear that once he died, they would make his daughter the queen. England had never had a queen before. And at the time, because of the way that society works, specifically with family inheritances, women don't often keep the titles that their fathers have. And so a lot of the lords were against this, despite the fact that they said that they would support her. However, once Henry was gone, he had a nephew named Stephen who came in and said, I'm the closest male relative, let me have the throne. And so all of these guys were like, yeah, we want to support you because you continue the line and the inheritance of the male, and we don't want to have a female ruler because it complicates things going on in the future, because all she's going to be used for is marriage and very complicated societal norms. But so that was called the anarchy. This was a big civil war in England in the late 12th century, early 13th century, where basically these two, the rightful heir was a woman and the pretender was a man. And everyone was kind of supporting back and forth, and a lot of evil things happened from both sides. And eventually what happened is Matilda, the female, had a son named Henry, who, once she died, took over her cause. And Stephen realized that, okay, I'm no longer the rightful heir, he's the rightful heir, so in order to make myself and my family wealthier, I am going to adopt him as my correct son. And so he adopts Henry, basically gives all of his rights to Henry, and that basically saves his family lineage from becoming extinct through feudalism. It's a mess. If you know your history, it's very complicated. But let's see here. Mirage GSM says, I'm getting a bit of mixed messages about the social status of the Bene Gesserit in the book. They seem to have a pretty high social status while at the same time being prejudiced against. Yeah, interesting point. So the Bene Gesserit in Dune have a lot of power. So for example, I'm trying to use more of a real world example. The best way to like put it into the real world is if you think about like the Masons, the Grand Masons, or that's probably the best way to think about it. So a lot of the Masons in like the 17th, 18th, 19th century put themselves into positions of power, like worked their way in there to the point that one day someone woke up and realized, why are all these wealthy people connected to the Masons? We should not, that's not okay. And so then they turned against the Masons and went after them and whatever. And that's kind of what's happening with the Bene Gesserit. They for thousands of years have worked themselves into positions of power. And people have started to realize that. And realize that a lot of the decisions happening in the world is a grand conspiracy by the Bene Gesserit, because they're this big kind of secret organization of witches who have put themselves in a position of power, are speaking into the ears of very, very wealthy, very, very powerful people. And the common people are starting to realize that maybe we don't want this grand conspiracy happening behind our Lord's backs. And so that's where that comes from, if that makes any sense. The Illuminati is or the theories about the Illuminati, I should say. There's not a ton of proof after the 14th century that the Illuminati is influencing politics the way that conspiracy theories would want you to think, if that makes any sense. The Masons are probably the most obvious example. But yeah, if you think of something like Angels and Demons, the Dan Brown Da Vinci Code series, that the Illuminati basically take that role in that series as well. Flick Street Productions says, I read that George R.R. Martin, including rape, sexual violence, abuse, and other stuff in Game of Thrones, is because he says correctly that was often the common behavior in ancient history. Yes. So George R.R. Martin's whole kind of goal, for lack of a better term, with Game of Thrones is to tell a war story from the perspective of medieval times. And so in that, he is being very upfront about the fact that war crimes not only happen, that they do happen today. If you guys are unfamiliar with what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's still happening. We just don't hear about it very often. But it was very, very prevalent among the small people in the Middle Ages. And so George R.R. Martin, writing from this perspective, he is trying to be as realistic as possible, with the detriment of, it's a violent book, it's a very, very terrifying book at points, but he wants to show that war causes bad things to happen, and so we should always try to strive for peace. George R.R. Martin has always been a very, very profound pacifist. He was very early on in Vietnam. He was a dissenter to Vietnam, and so he has always been anti-war. And so him telling this grand epic about abuse and about war and about the tragedies that happen in war to families and the common people and that sort of thing, that is his goal for the story, is to show you the problems that war causes, if that makes any sense. Viviana Velasquez says, quick question, did you start your channel again? Yeah, so what happened with the channel, we had a copyright problem back in May. And so we restarted everything. We started this channel, and then we got to another copyright issue a month ago or so. And so we started a second channel. We moved all of our full-time or full-length audiobooks over to a second channel, literally just called Echo Wirm. So we have two active channels. One is our daily chapters, which is Echo Wirm audiobooks, and then we have a second channel with all of our full-form content over on just Echo Wirm. So yes, there are two separate channels. That is kind of the long or the short backstory to a long explanation. I think I'm done with all of our pre-prepared questions, so I'll stick around if you guys want to keep asking questions in the chat. I'm always more than happy to answer everything that I think is appropriate to answer on camera, if that makes any sense. What is your favorite Game of Thrones book? My favorite by far is probably Storm of Swords. So that's the third one. Sorry, someone went by with a really loud bass. My studio is literally right under my driveway. And so every time a car comes by with really loud bass, it just rattles everything. It's really obnoxious. anyways, Storm of Swords is the third book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, which is the Game of Thrones series. And everything major that happens in the show happens in Storm of Swords. So you get the Red Wedding, you get the Purple Wedding, you get the Battle of the Battle on the Wall, the Watchers on the Wall scene, the Battle of the Night's Watch, or whatever they call it. You get the arrival of Stannis up in the north. I'm trying to think what else happens major in Storm of Swords. Obviously, those are the big ones. You get the death of Lysa Arryn. You get, there's a lot that happens in Storm of Swords. And so it's kind of, it was originally intended to be the final book, and then the series kind of got out of hand for George R.R. Martin. And so he has continued the series and is hoping to do 7 books. Obviously, there's only 5 out now. But yeah, Storm of Swords is by far my favorite. Vivian Velasquez says, I thought I was imagining it. Thanks. Yeah, that's the explanation for that. Stinker says, hello, do you remember me from other live streams? I do. Flick Street Productions says, as a fellow Christian, I'm surprised that many people don't acknowledge that plenty of debauched stuff happens in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. Yeah, it's something that's happened since the dawn of time. It's part of the fall of man, the evil of men, it's always been the case. It continues to be the case. It's just not nearly as common as it used to be, but it still does exist. Slavery still exists in the world pretty significantly, just not in the areas that we live, if that makes any sense. And so we in the Western world are often very comfortable with the world because from our perspective, the world is a very good place, but in a lot of other places, it's not always so great. So it's always interesting to read these stories, and like you said, even with the Bible, like people are always like, oh, that's such a horrible thing. Like I can't imagine this happening in the world today. And it's like, well, it kind of does. When are we getting more Book of Mormon readings? I think, so I did, my last batch of Book of Mormon readings, I think, are coming out early to mid-October. I grinded out like a lot of the middle books in the Book of Mormon are shorter. And so I'm just trying to like grind, I read through all of the really short ones. So like is it the Wisdom of Mormon or the Words of Mormon? All of those books around that should be coming out sometime in October. And then just on top of that with the Bible, just grinding my way through, man. I finished the book of Esther last night, so that's coming out in a couple days here. So Mirage GSM says, not a question, but fun fact. When you started reading The Red Pyramid, I noticed I had the book in my read pile for years. Must have been given to me at some point. Didn't know it was related to Percy Jackson. Yeah, so I've talked about my backstory with Percy Jackson before. I got really into Percy Jackson right when the 5th book came out. So the end of the original series. And around that time was kind of when it peaked in popularity. So this was about the time that the films came out. And as the series ended, Rick Riordan announced 2 more series. He announced the Kane Chronicles, which he was going to release. I think that was the spring one. And then in the fall, then he would release one of the Heroes of Olympus books. And so I always kind of went back and forth between reading Kane Chronicles in the spring and, Heroes of Olympus in the fall. And that was his release schedule for the longest time. And so that's my backstory with it. So I've always known that it was tangentially related, but for someone who, like, didn't grow up during that time when it was such a big deal that Rick Riordan was writing 2 series at once, I totally understand that perspective. I have a little free library in front of my house, and I was looking through it the other day, and someone had put the Red Pyramid in there, but it was like the 2nd or 3rd printing of it, and I didn't recognize the front because it has a completely different cover artist than like the first editions. All of my books in the Rick Riordan series are first editions. And so I didn't recognize the title, and I went, Red Pyramid? Oh my gosh, that's Kane Chronicles. So I left it in there. I think someone took it by now. But it is about 6 o'clock Eastern. I'll probably go for about 10 more minutes if you guys want to keep asking questions in the chat. So I'm totally happy to just hang and listen. It's always awkward if I leave dead air, though. Have you seen 21 Pilots in concert before? Yeah, I saw them 3 times on the Trench Tour. That's where this flag is from. I never got to go during the Icy tour, and so I never got to see that show, which is a shame because I really liked that album. And they're not doing much of it on this tour, which is fairly common for modern artists. Like, once they get done with a tour and they start a new tour, they typically don't do much music from the last tour because they're sick of it. So they will, like, they're doing a lot of their Trench stuff, but they're not doing their Skilled and Icy stuff. So, but my wife and I are going to see them in 2 weeks. They're down in Minneapolis, which is the closest metro to where I live. And so my wife and I are going to go down to Minneapolis and see them. She's never seen them before, so we're really excited about it. Stinker says, what's your favorite monster from Greek mythology? Geryon. Geryon has always been my favorite, and I don't know why. I think it's just because I have so much fun reading. But Geryon is a hoot. I love the Battle of the Labyrinth. It's one of my favorite Percy Jackson books. It is my favorite Percy Jackson book. It's one of my favorite Rick Riordan books. But I would say Geryon or the Minotaur are probably the two of my top options there. Mirage GSM says, is your t-shirt official merch or did you make it yourself? I think it's official. I don't know. Someone may have just made this. I didn't make it myself, but I bought it on Amazon. So if it's not official merch, then it's on Amazon illegally. But yeah, you can find anything on Amazon, honestly. I bought my son his first rugby ball the other day. I was very proud of that one. Flick Street Productions says, I'm going to go for now. See you next live stream. And I hope you continue to enjoy my new and upcoming content. Well, I do too. If you guys haven't checked out Flick Street stuff, go over to Flick Street Productions and check out their audiobooks over there. I know more stuff is coming out very soon. So there's a shout out to another audiobook channel. I'm always more than happy to do that. Why do you support Pacific FC? That's a good question. Yeah, so it's been a long time since I talked about my favorite sports teams on an Echo Worm live stream. So my family are all like big Wisconsin sports fans. So I'm a Packer fan, I'm a Bucks fan, I'm a Brewers fan. But there's no hockey team in Wisconsin professionally. So like I had to choose one. I could have chose the Minnesota Wild because that's the closest one. But I chose the Vancouver. Well, actually, I chose the Florida Panthers, and they weren't very good at the time. So then, when Roberto Luongo, their goalie, got traded to Vancouver, I followed him up there. I've been a Vancouver Canucks fan ever since. And then just because there's no switchover, like no team in Wisconsin crosses over with a team in Vancouver, and so like most of my favorite teams then are either Wisconsin or Vancouver, and so like. I cheer for, like, my favorite soccer team from Vancouver is Pacific FC because I prefer the CPL to the MLS, which is very uncommon. I'm well aware. But it's weird because my favorite MLS team isn't Vancouver. It's DC United, but that's because I've been an MLS fan longer than... Off on a tangent now, but... Sarah W. says, what's your drink flavor again? This is a strawberry acai refresher with lemonade, light ice, no berries. And you say, Ty, how can you get a strawberry drink without berries in it? Easy. It's berry flavored. I just don't want wet fruit sitting in there. Stinker says, do you also own a Camp Half-Blood shirt? I didn't, and then I ordered one. It's not here yet. I don't know why it's taking longer than this one did. But I did order one. I mentioned earlier in the live stream, I have a Cameo account now. So if you guys want me to read you something in Percy Jackson's voice or Harry Potter's voice or whatever, feel free to do so. There's a link down in the description below. But for all the Percy Jackson ones, I want to do it looking like Percy Jackson. So I realized I don't have a Camp Half-Blood shirt. So I bought a Camp Jupiter one and a Camp Half-Blood one as well. Ryan Peterson says, I am excited for the Brewers postseason. Me too. I am cautiously optimistic. Most of my teams never win anything. The Bucks and the Packers are the only teams that have ever won titles in my lifetime. I mean, DC United, but that was when I was like 5 years old. But yeah, if we had a healthy team, I think we would easily win the World Series. But we're missing our best player. So, arguably our best player. We have a really solid core, and Jackson Churio is the best rookie in the entire league. So, we'll see. we'll see how we do. But a few more minutes, and then I'm going to wrap things up here. We've been going for about an hour and a half now. I'm going to check Discord and YouTube just to see what's going on over on those, if there's any other questions I may have missed. Let's see here. Got all of those ones. Check the other account here. Got all of those ones. Check Discord. The end of these live streams are always so much fun for you guys, I'm sure. But got a new member in the Discord server. Happy to have you, Tommy. So yeah, if you guys want to continue this conversation, feel free to do so with the link to the Discord down in the description. I talked about us having free content over on Patreon and Vimeo that's not available on YouTube. That includes all of our Harry Potter recordings. That includes Hunger Games. So far, it's only The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. It should include the entire series once we're done with it. Also over there that we don't have available anywhere else is the Spiderwick Chronicles. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else we've removed from YouTube. I think that's it for now. Eventually, like A Song of Ice and Fire and Lord of the Rings are going to be over there for free. So if you're not following us on Patreon or Vimeo, you can do it for free. But additional content appears there that won't appear on YouTube. We'll make announcements for it when it's available. But Stinker says, what book are you excited to read? Mine is Stephen King's It. I'm getting it on October 1st. Good question. My book that I'm most excited to read right now that I haven't read yet on the channel is probably Catching Fire. It's next in my queue. It's my favorite Hunger Games book, and I have not recorded anything for it yet. So very, very excited to read that on the channel. But with that, I'm going to wrap it up here. Check out all the links below if you're interested. Otherwise, we will hopefully see you next week for our live podcast, sometime next Thursday evening or even into early Friday morning. Podcast is available every other week. You can find it on Apple Podcasts. You can find it on Spotify or even here on YouTube. And we will hope to see. I got one more question here from Ryan Peterson that says, just finished Chalice yesterday. I didn't realize it was only a year old. Probably already answered, but are you waiting to record Wrath that came out this week? No, I've already recorded it. I did it immediately. I went to Barnes & Noble at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I finished it by 10 o'clock in the evening. That is available currently over on patreon.com, and it will be up on the channel next Thursday. So with that, if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. We'll cover them in a couple weeks' time. But I hope to see you guys very, very soon. Have a great rest of your night.